Well, welcome to the Family Life Blended podcast. I'm Ron Deal. We help blended families and those who love them pursue the relationships that matter most. And to that end, let me remind you that the most watched video curriculum for blended family couples, called the Smart Stepfamily, is free to view online. Grab a participant's guide and you're off and running. You can watch by yourself or with a group of couples. The Smart Stepfamily. Check the show notes out. It'll tell you how you can get connected to that resource for free. Some of you are in later life and you're pursuing another person. You're in love and you're wondering about marriage or just living together or whether that's a good idea and how your kids are going to respond to this whole thing. Well, stay tuned. This is the topic that we're going to be talking about today on this edition of Family Life Blended. Now, if that doesn't describe your situation, please don't skip to the next podcast just yet. You'll learn some principles in our conversation that do apply to younger stepfamilies as well, or you might be listening for a friend that you know who is dating or considering marriage. Listen and then share this episode with them. Hey, I've got a Christmas encouragement for everyone that comes at the end of the episode today, so stay with me for that. And before I forget, if you'd like to say thank you to Family Life Blended with a year-end tax-deductible donation, we have an incredible opportunity for you. Family Life has a matching gift challenge until December 31st, 2023. Every dollar you give is doubled. This is so important to our ministry and keeping Family Life Blended, the leading blended family resource ministry in the world, keeping us on our feet, going and expanding. And you can help us by going to the show notes and making a donation. So let me just say thank you back to you in advance for that. You know, we love listening to our listeners. You know, when you write in and tell us what you're thinking, we love that. One woman recently wrote to us and said, "Working with Family Life Blended literally changed the trajectory of our stepfamily. It's so important to know that you're not alone on this journey. Ron and team, thanks so much for the work that you do to create this podcast resource." Well, I want to say thank you for taking the time to share that thought with us, and we're glad that it's blessing your life. And by the way, for all our listeners, please do us a favor. Share this podcast on social media or directly to a friend that you care about. Who knows? You might benefit their life the way this woman was touched and blessed by the ministry as well. Join us at Family Life and go on mission to change the world, or maybe just someone in your corner of the world. Well, Jim and Shirley Mozena are the authors of Second Chance at Love, Navigating the Path to Remarriage. Shirley is a speaker for Stonecraft Ministries, and she's written 3 books. Jim was owner and president of Mozena Consulting Group. He taught university business classes and authored 4 books on improving organizational performance. They absolutely love their blended family of 8 children, 17 grandchildren, and 3 great grandchildren. Jim and Shirley. Woo, yeah, that's right. You need a breath, don't you?
Yes.
Thank you guys for joining me today on this podcast. I appreciate it very much. I just want to say Merry Christmas to you.
Yes, Merry Christmas to you.
Hey, let's start there. What have you guys learned in your family journey? What have you learned about navigating the holidays with a big blended family?
Go ahead.
Well, it's we have a large family as you address the number of children that we have and grandchildren. We found it's better to just take one side of the family and have a gathering and then take the other side. So that means Christmas time is lots of days of having dinners or get-togethers.
Yes. Yeah, and I remember back from one of your past broadcasts where you talked about grandparenting and you talked about inclusion, trying to include everyone, which we did at first. And I found that every situation's a little bit different.
That's
And
right.
and so what we found out, we tried it at first, and there just seems, since there was some bitterness in my first marriage, was married for about 10 years and got divorced, and then I was married for 30 years when my second wife passed away, and she's number 3. and a third's the charm. But what we found out that it sort of was it was really uncomfortable for everybody. So in our situation, we decided to start having separate Christmases and everything, and that seemed to work out really well with the different families and whatever. So, that worked out for us.
Jim, that is a good wisdom, and I appreciate you sharing that with our listeners. One of the things
Yeah.
we do teach around here is have a plan, but be flexible. And
Yeah.
what I'm hearing
Right.
from you is that you tried the
Yeah,
family
we did.
gathering thing, and you figured out that wasn't going to work for you
No.
guys. And that's a discernment that I think all
Yeah.
blended family couples
Right.
need.
Yes.
We did find at Thanksgiving that it was okay to blend. I don't
Yeah,
know why
I
that
don't know
is,
why.
but
Right.
we have had 24 people at our table for Thanksgiving.
Yeah,
and it
right. We
worked.
have right. Phew. But the thing is, you're right. But she's such a good cook and everything. That sort of draws people to.
Yeah,
But
that'd
that
be a
does
good part of
work.
it.
That is interesting. That was good.
Yeah.
Thanksgiving worked, but Christmas holidays we did differently. So you're right. Every situation seems to be different. So
Yeah, that's good. Well, you guys seem to be high on second chance relationships, if I could say it that way, since that's the title of your book.
yeah.
Yes.
So let me ask you a question that I hear from our listeners and people at my speaking events.
Okay.
Why should a couple who is later in life pursue a second chance at love? I mean,
Yes.
when people get candid with me, they say, man, why not just coast through life or find someone you can live with without a permanent commitment and just don't even bother getting married? I think what they're saying is, is it worth the risk?
Yes.
What would you guys say to that?
Go ahead, Shirley.
Well, I think it's worth the risk, but some people may not think it is worth the risk. I really enjoy being married. I enjoy the companionship. I like cooking meals and sitting across the dining table and hearing how delicious it is. I like sharing evenings, but you need to do it at the right time. After my second husband passed away very suddenly of a brain aneurysm, I was hurting so badly, and I knew that I was happy when he was there. So therefore, maybe I should find somebody to share my life with again, and that sadness would leave. Well, it was the wrong time to pursue that. You have to get through your grief first, and then it's okay. And I have learned really to be content by myself or with a spouse. And I'm very happy now. And I hold these days together lightly in my hands because I know it could change very quickly, but I can trust God to take care of me.
Absolutely. Hey, why don't you tell them a story about Jane, what Jane said to you, your friend?
Right. I have a very dear friend. We've known each other since junior high school, and she and I were widows together. Her husband passed away of brain cancer, and it's interesting that she and I were engaged both at the same time and were married within a week of each other. But at their fourth year, her second husband had stomach cancer. And they lived in the same house that she lived in with her first husband. And he actually died in that same bedroom that her first husband died in. And I asked her before he died, I asked her, are you glad that you took this step and you married Chuck? And she said, definitely. It's worth the pain. I don't like where I am right now, but it's worth the pain.
Yes.
I'm really keen in on that word you used a minute ago, content. When people are not content with their current circumstance, whatever that is,
Uh-huh.
and they're not in a trusting posture with God, don't you think they get vulnerable to making decisions that are not very wise, maybe marrying too quickly or overlooking some things about this person that they kind of are so romantic about them
Yes.
that they overlook some obvious things they need to be a little concerned about.
Yes.
So contentment seems to be that thing that says, I don't have to do this.
Yes.
I don't have to get married. I don't have to stay single. But I'm content where I am.
Yes,
That's
absolutely.
One thing that we learned. I went through a similar situation after my second, when my wife passed away 10 years ago of pulmonary fibrosis. Thought that since I sold my business and took care of her for a year, that we spent a lot of time together. So I thought I worked through some grief, but I really hadn't. I got into a relationship too soon, and because I enjoy being married. Some people have a desire, God has this desire for people to get together, and some people don't. In our Grief Share program that we've done over the years, many, many people ask us to sort of, should I get remarried or not? And it's pretty well what we've found. God has a different plan for each one of us. So, but after, you got to be content first, and then you can make a decision of if you need to seek another spouse or not.
Yes.
Yeah. So, guys, this is fantastic stuff, because the next question I had planned for you were some good dating practices, and we're already there. I'm hearing be content. I'm hearing do your grief work.
Yes.
I want to press into that just for a minute, because I think you made another great observation, Jim. At least in your experience, you dated too soon. You realized you had more grief work, if you will, to do.
Yes.
Here's one of the things I've noticed. When people say, well, have you grieved enough to be ready to date again? Well, the answer is everybody should say, I don't know.
Yeah.
Because you think you have until you move into a new relationship that requires you to sacrifice, requires of you to think about the future and make and begin to alter your life on behalf of wrapping it around this new person. Then and only then will you realize whether you have more grieving to do.
Yes.
The more you move towards somebody, the more you have to think about separating from the past attachments that you've had in life.
Yes. Yeah.
So it's sort of like life is going to help you grieve.
Yes. Yes.
Exactly.
The question is, are you open to that when it shows up?
Yes. Now, one of the things we have found out that we mentioned in the book is that people, when they meet a new relationship, many times get infatuated, and we call them the honeymoon drugs. So you get a lot of endorphins and whatever, and you feel great.
And they're on fentanyl, by the way.
Yes.
Those drugs, they include fentanyl, which is dangerous.
Yeah, very dangerous, right? And so what we found is that you got to be real careful, because when you're infatuated and those drugs are flowing through your head, you feel great, and you start only seeing what you want to see and all the good stuff. And the realities of the complexity of a blending a family and all that is something that you've really got to be cautious of. And that's why we talk a lot about watch out for your red flags, and also even ask your friends about, do they see any red flags? Which for me was the case. When I was in that relationship, my friend said, oh, Jim, you should be careful. Even though she's a good Christian lady or a good lady, you got to be, you might be going a little too fast. So, and I said, oh, I'll make it work out. Well, not necessarily. So thank God that didn't work out. And we had a counselor that said, no, that's not the right time. So it worked out for us. And so we broke off and opened us to what God wanted was right here.
Right. Well, and I learned too that it isn't just exactly the time. Like, for example, in my first marriage, after my husband of 40 years died, it was about 2 years. And I just really had this hankering for companionship. And so I met somebody, or it was 2 years. And so I thought, okay, it's probably enough time. And so I did, and it worked out. It was wonderful. We met and we both clicked. And it was a very good second marriage. So after he died suddenly, I wanted that same thing back. I was desperate, really. And 2 years passed, and I thought I worked through my grief and started dating. And really, because of how I allowed myself to get into this relationship that didn't work out eventually. But the 2 years was not a good monitor for me. It wasn't that. I just wasn't over it yet. I hadn't worked through my grief.
I feel the need to press into something here that you guys are bringing up. I think is so important. My wife and I do a lot of speaking on grief. Our grief story is different than yours. We lost one of our children.
Yes.
And we teach and talk that good grief is a journey, not a destination. You never get to
Yes.
the end and now you're done.
Yeah.
Right.
It is not something to be conquered. Our Western culture says, smother that thing and get past it.
Uh-huh.
Have you, we ask questions to people. Have you found closure yet? Well, what in the world does that mean?
Yeah.
Like, is it
Yeah.
gone? No, it's not gone. But one of the things I find with people who have experienced death or divorce is that when we talk about grief with them, we talk about it as if it is a destination.
True.
Okay, you're done grieving. Now it's time to enter a new marriage. Well, wait a minute. Here's the thing, folks. Grief comes with you into the new marriage.
Yes.
Yes.
There's got to be days where you're reflecting upon a previous relationship or a great memory of a time and a
Absolutely.
season. You
Yeah.
have children. You think about your children and who their biological parents were and
Yes.
what they mean to those children. Like,
Yeah.
this is the
Absolutely.
ever-present reality, even as you love one another.
Yeah.
Right.
So the idea that you've somehow finished that and can turn a corner into something new is just a setup for, I think, discouragement and
Right.
and feeling odd, perhaps, about carrying those prior people with you into this new relationship.
Yes. And because the reality is, we talk about our spouses Shirley stands on the shoulders of her past spouses and it made her who she is. And I love that about her. But one of the things about grief, what we've found too, dealing with the grieving people over the last 10 years, is that at first we're overwhelmed with emotions, and part of our brain, we every time we think of it, we cry, we're overwhelmed with it. What happens is we tell our stories over and over again. In Grief Share, we talk about the idea you got to tell your story 100 times to save people. And as we do that, it seems to be that our feelings move from the emotional side of our brain over to the rational side, where the memories become precious memories. They're never forgotten. They're always there, and they'll come with us in the second marriage, and they come to the point where they can be shared too. The new spouse has to honor that. And that's one thing why when you're marrying again, one of the things that's helpful when you marry another widow or widower, because they understand that. And so, which is different than divorce, which is a little different dynamic. So,
Yeah.
but that precious, you eventually do get to the point where you're not overwhelmed with tear and you're not stuck in that grief, but they become those precious memories. And I lost my daughter a year and a half before my wife passed away, and the precious memories of Kara will always be there. It's just that they become precious memories and they're not overwhelming as they were at first.
Yeah. Oh, my brother. First of all, I'm
Yeah.
sorry for that
Yeah.
great loss
Yes.
in your life,
Yes.
because I know how that lingers and how
Oh,
we
yeah.
carry all that with us.
Oh, absolutely.
And so part of marrying later in life is embracing the losses of this new spouse
Yes. Yes.
and maybe even helping them reflect on those things.
Right.
And
Oh,
stepping
yes.
into that space
Yes.
with them and not shutting it down or closing it off or getting
Right.
rid of the symbols. There might be an appropriation of certain possessions and things that
Yeah.
symbolize
Yes.
the prior family or relationships, and you can put those in different places, have an appropriate place for them. So what I'm
Yes.
trying to say.
Yes.
Exactly. Yes,
Right.
But
that's true. We actually, many of our conversations are, well, what happened when such and such happened? Like when your kids acted up or whatever it was. We often talk about our past life, often. And it's not like, oh, I want to go back there. It's more like, that's what happened when I climbed Mount Hood.
That's
It
right.
was tough, but
Yeah.
I made it through, or whatever the situation is.
And also, you got to be careful. You don't want to be jealous. I mean, that's the real danger. There's nothing to be jealous about, particularly when you're from a widow and a widower, lost your spouse. It's easier. You know that person's gone. But when you're dealing with remarriage from a divorce situation, that's a different dynamic. It's a little more difficult. Like people ask me, what was more difficult, Jim, when you got divorced or when you lost Kathy, your late wife? Actually, what I say is my divorce was more difficult because the pain after 40 years now is still there with our grandkids. And when I worked with men's ministry, I try to help guys think it's not going to get better. try to work it out with what your family right now. So that's, yeah.
Well, let's switch into another big topic that we hear from people about who are getting married later in life, and that is the adult children.
Yes.
Yes.
I'm going to give you a little scenario and you guys react to that.
Okay.
And then let's talk about this because it is such an important subject, I think, for couples to not overlook. Just last week, I was speaking at a church and a woman came up to me and she said, I've never been married before. I'm in my late 50s. I've met a guy. We're in love. We've been dating almost a year. He is refusing, though, to introduce me to his 3 adult children. I'm not really sure what to make of that. He is concerned that they are, not feeling great about
Yeah.
dad dating again. And so he said,
Yeah.
I'm just sort of waiting until the time seems right. And her question was, should I be okay with that? Should I press into this and want to meet them? But the
Yeah.
bottom line is, how do I think about
Yeah.
his kids?
Yeah.
Yeah. Thoughts, reactions to that?
Yes.
Go ahead.
I would say that might be a red flag, something that she might be cautious about. I can tell you, it's really kind of funny. When I met my second husband, and pretty quickly we became engaged, both of his sons lived in different towns. And I can remember the first time I met his son, Greg, he was on the phone. He said, "Hi, Greg. I just wanted to tell you I'm engaged, and here she is. Meet my wife, or meet my fiance." And so he gave me the phone, and I talked to him, and poor Greg said, "Well, hello," but it really worked out okay. But I think your children need to know that there's a need in your life, and they need to accept it. And in my circumstances, for the most part, my children came around. Sometimes it took them a little while.
Yeah. But with that one mishap you had about Ron, you remember your daughter Erica said, "Be cautious, Mom."
Oh, yeah. She said, "Aren't you moving a little bit too quickly?" And, "Oh, no, I'm doing fine. It's the same amount of time. I'll be fine." And sometimes you do need to listen to your children.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And that's,
They know you and care about you the most.
yes.
That's right.
And the reality is, I would love to had all the stepkids and my kids to love Shirley the same. It isn't that way. I mean, we'd
No.
love it to be that way, but there's a difference. Like when I was raising my stepkids when they were little, in my second marriage, I always wanted to be their dad, but I soon learned that I'm a father, but not a dad, and I'm a dad, but not a father. And it was sort of, that sounds confusing, but if you're in a step family, you sort of understand those
Yes,
things.
that's exactly right.
Right.
And they're not the same. The
No,
dad,
no,
father,
right.
stepfather, it's not the same.
No, it is not. And I wanted to be, but you got to realize it is going to be, the bonding is different. And as much as you try, sometimes you do, if you get the child when they're very, very young, as infants, they'll have that bonding with you. But when they're children or teenagers or adults, the bonding is different, and you got to make the best that you can of it, and respect that they have a natural parent too, and so
Especially if they're still alive.
yes, right,
Yeah.
So what if somebody says to you, well, we're dating, we're planning to get married. All of our kids are in their 20s and 30s.
Yes.
And so we know they have their own life, their own careers.
Yeah.
And this is going to be fine with them. They're
Yeah.
not going to care that
Yeah.
we got married.
Yeah, it's obviously different for each child, because like I had one son that was very close to my second wife that passed away, and when Shirley came in the picture, it took him a while to sort of shift his emotions. Now he loves Shirley very much, but others of it just jumped right in and said, "Dad, we can see you're happy and whatever." And so you got to respect each my kids were different, the way they jumped into the relationship and how long it took them to sort of feel comfortable with my new wife. But it's always a little bit different. It's not their original mother or their,
That's right.
So
Or in my case, dad.
or dad, right? So that's the hard thing about
Yeah.
it. And so,
Yeah, I think most people really underestimate how significant
yeah,
it is to an adult child that their parent marries again.
Yes.
It's changing so much
Yes.
within
It
the
really
family.
does.
Yeah.
It does.
There's 15 more people at Thanksgiving.
Right.
There's extra
Hmm.
kids running around
Yeah.
at Christmas, and
Yeah.
grandkids and
Right.
step-grandkids
Right.
and step-nephews and nieces, and, like, how old is that?
Yeah.
And those are all new relationships for those
That's
people.
Absolutely.
right.
Yes.
And they didn't ask for it.
And
That's right,
that's
Yeah.
right.
and so it's sort of been forced upon them,
Uh-huh.
sorta like other things have been forced upon
Yeah.
them.
Right.
And again, so you can go about this in a respectful tone in terms of talking to your kids
Hmm.
and the story you just told a minute ago, Shirley, about, "Hey, surprise, you gotta I'm engaged." I would go about it a little bit differently, like,
I would have too.
Yes. Right.
slowly introduce and start gaining
Right.
conversation with them before those big monumental
Yes.
announcements are made, and slowly work them into it. And you're
Absolutely.
at the same time listening and hearing what it is that they're concerned about or
Yeah.
thinking about. The fact that you had a daughter say, "Mom, I'm wondering if you're moving a little too fast," in that second
Right.
situation.
Hmm.
And so, you know, it is a two-way street, and they are deeply invested in the outcome of this
Yes.
process. And so you've
Hmm.
got to include them in it.
Exactly.
Yes.
Yes, that's
Very
true.
much so. Very
Mm.
much before you dump the question on them. Right.
Right,
Right.
right. And
Right.
just remember they're gonna have different levels of motivation toward having new relationships
That's
and how
right.
they're
Uh-huh.
gonna try to do
That's
that.
right. That's right.
Mm,
Very much so.
And the other thing is too, sometimes we have to accept that they're not interested and they really don't care. Um, Unfortunately, that's kind of with some of our children. They decline invitations where
mm,
we want to invite maybe one side of the family over, and it's, well, we're busy. They don't even make
mhm.
excuses. It's just we won't be able to come.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Period.
yeah. You're trying to figure out how to navigate their space, creating opportunities, but
Right.
they just don't have that need,
Right.
Right. And
Right.
it's not that they don't love us or whatever.
right?
We've
Right.
that's where you've got to have a lot of grace and understanding.
And he has a lot. I really respect it. And I think it probably came from the tumultuous years when his children were younger and they were a split family. So,
Well,
Yeah.
and one thing I really always made sure I made a commitment early on in I got divorced to never say anything bad against her mother, which is very difficult because she was very bitter, and I think that's because of that I have a very good relationship with my two boys. I have three kids of my own, and so with the two boys, we went out every Thursday, every other weekend, and every summer. We had very close relationships, so that worked well. Unfortunately, my daughter was at 13, which is an absolute terrible time, and she sort of went with my mother, and she unfortunately heard a lot of the negativity, and so I've sort of become sort of an uncle to her, which is fine. I respect her where she's at, and I try to have lunch with her every so often. And but it's a very different relationship because of all that, and
Mm.
I just accept it and thank God that think that I have that.
and I'm the one that wants to kind of tweak it and say, well, why doesn't she want to? And, I go into that, but I need to let it go because it's his
And
family.
and and that's where the rub is, and, I mean, it's this delicate balance. You said a minute ago, you have to accept that not all kids have the same desire for a relationship
Right.
or depth of a
Yes.
relationship with you,
Uh-huh.
and you have to meet them where they are, even though you still long for more,
Yes.
right?
Right.
And
Right.
you can try to create
Yes.
opportunities, but you can't
Right.
force them into it.
Absolutely.
Well, there's always that longing in all of us because what we're really longing for is that perfect relationship that we're not going to experience until heaven with
Mhm.
Jesus.
Yeah.
And
Mhm.
then it
Yeah.
will be good.
That's true.
Well, I'm wondering if there are any other red flags that you guys have encountered, either personally or with other couples.
Um, I do want to reemphasize a period of infatuation is where we've seen most of the mistakes are made. That
Uh,
is a real red flag because you got to be real careful. We have at the end of each chapter, as you know, Ron, questions for people to ask their spouse, their engaged person, and and also we ask them sometimes ask friends because sometimes you don't
Right.
see it yourself. So that's one red flag that you got to be real careful of and maybe try to really respect people for other people's opinion what's going on and try to listen carefully to them because that's one when we've seen from people grieving people who've got remarried that have been absolutely wonderful, but we've also seen disasters because people did not look at that red flag of infatuation, and then they start discovering the issues around money and blending the families and sex and politics and all those other issues that, faith, all of those things that need to be pretty well shared and understood at least and accepted by both sides.
Right. Well, absolutely. In red flags, the first one you mentioned was faith. You didn't mention it first, but it's the most important, which is faith. Maybe they're not at the same level of their walk, their Christian faith as you, or maybe they're just really attending church or doing group spiritual things together just to please you. Yeah. But pretty quickly you can find out if that is really if it's genuine or not, and that definitely is a red flag.
Yes, it is. And also Ron's book. In that book, you also say that faith is critical. You've got to really make sure. That's one of the first things you said in your steps, is to really make sure that you're both aligned with that. Because if you have different worldviews, you're going to be, and religious beliefs, and different religions, and even different types of Christianity or whatever denominations and all that, you're gonna have some real challenges.
Yeah, don't overlook those differences. No. They need to come into alignment. A couple other things that when you mentioned infatuation, I thought of, a quick turnaround, I think, is a hazard of infatuation. That is when somebody comes out of a divorce or being widowed and within months is moving into another relationship. Yes. I'd love to have you comment on that. And premarital sex is often
absolutely
part of that that rush of energy towards one another. Right. What are your thoughts around those?
Well, since for men, it's really a big deal, but it could be for women too. Unfortunately, that was a real hard thing for me. And it's one thing that Shirley and I, when we got engaged, right away.
Actually,
before
at our first date.
Our first date at Starbucks, we even said, Shirley brought it up.
I said,
which is great. She said, I do not believe in having sex before marriage. And I said, I agree. And we said, we're going to have to really commit to that. And because it's difficult. It really is difficult. In this day and age, people living together, they're saying, we've been married many before, so what's the big deal about sex?
What's the big deal? And I'm not going to get pregnant, so that's another drawback.
I lived about 30, 40 miles away, so we bought a house when we were engaged, what we did first before we did that, Shirley lived 40 miles away, so she had a guest room, so I stayed with her. But we made a commitment that we wouldn't have any sex or anything. But then we got aware, actually our son and daughter-in-law, or my daughter. Right. And she said, the perception of our grandkids, we know that you are respecting your commitment, but the perception of others and of other people.
Our neighbors, my neighbors.
So I moved out right away and moved into the new house, and it was still being remodeled. So I just moved out because even the perception, we didn't want to have that, and also for the grandkids. But it is a difficult issue because it will come up. It is at 60 as it was at 20 for many of us. The drive to be intimate sexually is still there, and it is a hard issue. We talk about it. That's one whole chapter in our book because sex is a big issue.
And the emotional attachment. When you become intimate sexually too soon, then other things kind of fade away that are important parts about your life that you just really need to talk about, and maturity, just many ways and how you look at life.
Yeah, my contention is it steals discernment.
Yes.
As soon as you're bonding sexually, brain, body, soul is coming together, and you are just assuming the absolute best about this person.
Yes.
And we actually know, the attachment process that happens when two people combine sexually. And so all of a sudden, you're not now evaluating the relationship and the person with both eyes open.
No.
Right? You kind of have both eyes shut.
Right.
And so that's one of the issues. And you're
Yes.
right. No matter what stage of life you're in,
Yeah, it's very
Yes.
different.
that,
And I
that
have
is
to
a relevant issue.
and I have to be honest, I mean, my first marriage, were sexually beforehand, and it clouded things and also made
Mhm.
everything much more difficult, and also probably was one of the things that also led to her leaving and taking the kids. It was a so I mean, it can be it's a very it's so common. People just think it's so common now. Just go ahead, but it makes such a difference in how you see red flags, you build the relationship and all that.
Yeah.
It is a tough one, and
Yeah.
I don't want to be judgmental of anybody. It's going to be hard.
A couple things just occurred to me. You mentioned earlier, talking about finances when you get married and thinking
Yes,
through some of those issues. Um, a lot of people are choosing to just live together these days because then you
yes,
keep yours, I keep mine.
yes,
We don't have to even bother with the wedding. It just
right,
makes life simpler.
absolutely,
And of course, sex is a part of that picture, as
yeah,
well as now we're not even bothering to deal with things like money management.
right.
All of those just seem to be ways of not being together and
Uh-huh.
clouding the type of relationship commitment that you really have with one another. So again, what are your thoughts around all of that?
Well, with when I married a second time, there was no divorce in either of our pasts, so that makes it easier, definitely. But we did have a prenuptial agreement, and it was we had determined that certain things would go to our own children,
Mhm.
and we would combine some things. And so we did that. It was all very open. I moved into his home, kept my home and rented it out. And but there was a life estate in
Mm.
that prenuptial agreement. Later, we began to get a real will once we were married, but we never signed it. We got to we were very close to signing it, but we'd just been on a long trip and we put it off. And he died very suddenly. So the prenuptial agreement was there that just protected me
Mhm.
and protected his children too in both ways. And I'm really so grateful that we did that. So
We did too.
and so we
Mm.
did the same thing. But one thing I will tell you, which should have uh, opened my eyes, and it kind of did, was in that wrong engagement. When I had a prenuptial agreement, I went to my attorney and had it done, and he didn't want to sign it.
Huh.
Red flag.
So
Yeah.
yes,
Yeah.
and that's about a week after that he did break it off. So I think it was probably that did
Well,
it.
I will add to that conversation. I appreciate that candor so much. It's a really good example of why it's so important to talk about
Yeah.
estate
Yes,
planning and
Oh,
yes,
financial matters.
absolutely.
You may not know, but we've actually published a book. It's one of the books in our series called The Smart Stepfamily Guide to Financial
Oh,
Planning.
excellent.
And
Okay.
we recommend to people that they get a prenup of a different kind. We've actually coined a term, the togetherness agreement.
oh wow,
And it's all about not if things go wrong, what are we going to do if we end up breaking up, but how do
yes,
we provide for things that go right?
Yes.
And
yes,
how do we care for you, your children, me, my children, whatever the case may be? And some very creative financial tools are discussed
Oh,
in that resource. So I'll
oh
just mention that to our
that's
listeners: the
great.
Smart
that's
Step Family Guide to Financial Planning. Again, check the show notes to learn more about
Yes.
that.
Yeah, to me that's very important because one of the chapters we have on finances, particularly when you get married later in life,
Hmm.
you have the whole issue of retirement. You've built up pensions, you've built up
That's
retirements,
right. There's a
IRAs,
lot to consider.
there's a lot to consider. You have inheritance usually issues with children and all that. And so all of, those are, you called it, what was it,
A
Ron?
togetherness
The
agreement.
togetherness agreement. And also, we always talk about our three buckets. There are things in her bucket that are hers that will go to her children. There
Mhm.
are things that I have in my bucket that go to my children. But there's a center bucket that we put all the current income and also all the current expenses, and that's ours. And we combine that very much so because we found that when you're committed and you have as what we refer to as covenant marriage, that you really are deeply, you're going to do whatever it takes to work through things. That the money is everything. Things need to be combined in a certain sense, not everything, but the majority of it. So, so that's how we sort of look at that. And and that before we did that, it can, and I like your idea of the togetherness agreement,
Right.
because it's not only what happens when it breaks apart, but you got to look at too, what are you going to do with the togetherness when who's going to pay for what? And that I just said who's going to pay for what. I don't like that term. To me, everything comes out of that center bucket. It's ours, our bills, our expenses, our income. And then we have, for our retirement funds that we brought in, those are separate, going to our inheritance. And those are separate things, but we live together as a combined couple.
Yeah,
We do,
that's
yeah,
good. And
yeah,
you found your process. We
yeah, right,
recommend to couples that they find what works for
yeah,
them, given
right.
their unique circumstances.
That's
And
right.
so there's a lot of good ways to handle that.
Yes, yes.
Guys, I'd like to close with a quote from your
Okay.
book.
Oh,
Don't you,
okay.
don't you love it when somebody reads something back
Yes,
to you
thank
that
you. Yes,
some people essentially try to leave their past marriage and family behind when
yes,
they bond again and form a new family. You, on the
right.
other hand, like to say, here you go, you say you're standing on the shoulders of your previous
Yes,
spouses.
yes,
I loved that when I
yeah,
saw it.
yeah,
Tell us what you mean by that.
Well, I was married to one person, my first husband, Bill, for 40 years. He taught me a lot about resilience. He was a mountain climber, and if I wanted to be with him, that's what I had to do too. So I learned. We had some difficulties in our earlier part of our marriage. We didn't communicate very well, and it was rough, but we learned how to do it. And I took that experience into my second marriage. And even though it was a shorter one for 17 months, I used some of those things, and I learned that I could be loved again
Hmm.
and that God really loved me. And so it left me open to
yes.
join my life with Jim.
Yes, and I appreciate that, because that's who made Shirley. Shirley's lived, she lived 43 years with another husband besides me, and it really shaped who she is. And she has incredible talents and gifts and things, and a lot of that was developed during those years. So I want to cherish that too, and a lot of my learnings. I mean, even I was maybe a little selfish with sex in my earlier marriage, and that was one learning that I said, I don't want to do that again. I want to be very much open to serving Shirley, and it's made our relationship in the last 10 years wonderful in so
Yes.
many ways, by honoring our past and learning from each other's spouses, and just looking at it that way, Ron.
Mm. You guys, thank you so much for
Yeah.
being with me. I
Well,
appreciate it.
certainly. Okay.
It's
And
been
Merry
good.
Christmas to
Yes,
you.
Merry Christmas
Merry
to you.
Christmas to you.
Okay.
And to our listener, if you want to learn more about Jim and Shirley and their work and their book, check the show notes. We'll get you connected. And before I forget, this isn't the only resource we've ever produced to address later life blended families. We get asked this all the time. We sometimes call them second half step families. You can look through our podcast episodes and you'll find other conversations around this. But we also have book chapters in a number of my books, and scattered throughout the Smart Step Family, an entire chapter in Building Love Together and Blended Families. All of those things are going to be helpful. But if you can't find what you're looking for, just email us. All right, we'll help you find it. Email us, blended@familylife.com. We'll get you connected to what you're looking for. Let me remind you once again of our year-end matching gift challenge. Any amount you give before December 31st will be doubled. We appreciate it in advance. It occurs to me that Christmas is a season of giving. We give our loved ones gifts. I give myself the gift of as much dessert as I can possibly eat. And of course, most importantly, we are reminded each year of the greatest gift of all, Emmanuel, God with us. And we have promises galore in Scripture that he will continually be with us. Hebrews 13, verse 5, never will I leave you, never will I forsake you. Then there's James 4:8, draw near to God, and he will draw near to you. By the way, him drawing near to us is not dependent on us doing all the work first. James is saying the character of God is such that he is already available. You just need to be open yourself to him, and you will be near to this God. Listen, guys, the entire Bible is a story of a God who keeps drawing near to his creation, even in the midst of our sin. Celebrate that grace this Christmas. Enjoy the giving, but rest and find peace in the receiving of the greatest gift in history, Jesus the King. I'm Ron Deal. Thanks for listening. On behalf of the podcast production team and Family Life, let me just say, Merry Christmas. Family Life Blended is part of the Family Life Podcast Network, helping you pursue the relationships that matter most.